Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about some emotional fantasy reads that I've absolutely adored. Now, before we get into the list, be aware that I am talking about the tearjerkers today. I'm talking about books that make you feel so sad that they break your heart. I do know that I could also be talking about feel-good fantasy books that make you feel happy, and if you do want to have a fantasy recommendation list like that, please let me know because I can make one of those in the future, but that's not what we're talking about today. Now, I also know that if we talk about good fantasy books or series, there needs to be some emotional investment. If you look at the Dandelion Dynasty, A Song of Ice and Fire, or The Witcher, for example, yes, these are fantasy series that I love. And of course, I had some teary eyes when I was reading them now and then. Because you come to care about these characters and sad things are going to happen. Some characters might die. And of course, this breaks your heart just a little bit. But I don't think that that is the emphasis of these epic fantasy tales. I think that the emphasis here is more the political intrigue and the backstabbing and everything that happens in this big epic world, where the emotional investment is something that is needed, but it's not on the forefront. So the list that I have here next to me, emotional investment and feeling sad and having the feeling that your characters cannot catch a break is something that is very big in these books. So be aware that that's something that you will have here. If this is something that you don't like, this will be some sort of anti-TBR for you, I suppose. But if this is something that you do like, get your pen and paper and note down all of these titles. And the first book that I have here in my hands is already a tearjerker. It's a beautiful story, but it has some extremely sad moments as well. And that is The Sort of Kaigan by Emma Wang. This is an adult fantasy standalone. You don't have a lot of those, and the story in itself is just incredibly solid. In this book, we follow a mother and son duo, Mamoru and Misaki, and they live in a peninsula of the Kaiganese Empire. Now, the Empire has them believing that they are the Sort of Kaigan. They are the protection of the Empire against foreign invaders. This is their sole purpose in life, you could say. But then an outsider comes into the village, and Mamoru and this outsider's son start talking, and it seems like maybe the Empire is not really as honest, and maybe some of these foundations of this peninsula are based upon a lie. So this is one of these stories. But on the other hand, of course, we have Misaki, Mamoru's mother. And she sits in a loveless marriage and she needs to question who she is. She's a mother, she is a wife, but is that all she is or is there more to it? All of that already is, of course, incredibly emotional, but then war comes to this country. This is a story of grief, this is a story of acceptance, but also learning who you are, I suppose. And all in all, this is just a beautiful fantasy story. There's also some elemental magic, so apart from the emotional tale, there's also just an entire plot that is very solid as well. I would say that the first 100 pages were a little bit difficult to get into. This is, by the way, an 600 page book. So the first 100 pages you might feel unsure about, but after that, you are completely hooked. So one that I would highly recommend if you're in for a good cry session. Now, if you know me, you know that I love character-driven stories and coming-of-age tales. And when you put these two together, you're in for an emotional ride. I don't know why, but there's just something about having a main character who is a child that makes everything all the more emotional. I think that part of it is because children are innocent and everything that is happening to them, all the awful things that are happening to them, are completely out of their control. Now, I do have quite a couple of books that fit that list, but these two fit the bill perfectly. The first one that I want to talk about is Phaedras Art by Jacqueline Carey. This is the first book in the Phaedra trilogy, and this is slowly becoming my favorite series of all time, or at least in the top 5. Shouldn't make predictions before I finish the entire trilogy, but I'm really enjoying this. Part of it is the beautiful writing style. If prose is something that you find important, look up Jacqueline Carey's books, because her writing style is superb. But part of it is also the story and, of course, the main character. In this one, we meet Phaedra. We meet Phaedra when she's very young, I think 5, maybe 6 years old, and then she gets sold off by her mother and father because they don't really want her anymore. Now, they don't just sell her to anybody, they sell her to somebody of the night court. This is a long street of brothels, basically. Now, this might sound extremely horrible, but in this country, prostitution is tied into the service of Nama, one of their goddesses. So this is actually a religious act almost. So it's not as bad as what it would be in real life, but still, being sold off by your parents, that's going to lead to some kind of trauma, I think. Phaedra gets sold off to different people, and in the end, she gets used as a pawn in political intrigue. So that's also something that we have here and that I've talked about a couple of times. The political intrigue in this book and the plot in itself is just absolutely amazing. I think that the political intrigue and the quality of it is very close to the quality that we see in A Song of Ice and Fire. So if this is something that you love, definitely pick this up as well. But Phaedra grows through a lot and you feel attached to her. This is one of my favorite main characters that I've read about in the past couple of years, and it's just horrible what she goes through. And you will definitely need a napkin a couple of times to dry your eyes. Now, the other one, I don't think that that's a surprise, to be honest. Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings, a big 16-book-long fantasy series. In this first one, we meet Fitz. Fitz is the royal bastard. He's the bastard son of the crown prince, and when he is 6 years old, his family decides that they don't want to take care of him anymore, and they leave him as the castle gate. Now, in the castle, they are not really prepared to have him here. He was not wanted, and they don't really know what to do with him. So they leave him at the stable, and there he gets taken care of by Burrick, who is the stableman. Until one day the old king decides that he does have a purpose for Fitz. He's going to train him to become the royal assassin. Now, Robin Hobb must be a beautiful human being in real life, but as an author, she's horrible, because what she puts Fitz through, I haven't seen for any other fantasy series. This is the fantasy series that has hit me the hardest, I think. And for me, the original trilogy is the hardest because, like I said, Fitz is a very young boy here. But in the later installments, when he's a grown man, you see the effect of his childhood and how this affects him throughout his entire life. This is one of those books, I listen to them on audiobook, and when I drive and a sad moment occurs, I need to stop driving because I can't see through my tears. That's how sad this series is. So definitely one that you want to pick up, and not in the same way as Cashil's Dart, but the plot and some of the political intrigue here is very interesting as well. So it's not just emotional investment and just characters that you come to love, it's also the plot that's behind it. Next up, I have 2 Grimdark installments. Now, if you think that Grimdark is emotionless by default, I think you're entirely wrong, at least for these 2 books that I'm going to talk about. The first one is one that is quite similar than the other 2 books that I talked about in a way, and that is Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. This is a coming-of-age tale, and in this book we meet Valen when he's 10 years old and his father leaves him at the gates of the Sixth Order. Now, his father does this for a couple of reasons. First of all, he doesn't really know what to do with Valen after his mother died, and second of all, he is a patriot. He finds the Empire more important than his son, so he wants to see his son installed as a warrior of the faith. Now, this is an incredibly harsh learning school. Every year, boys die during a test, and that means that this book is emotional for a couple of reasons. First of all, of course, Valen grows up knowing that his father cast him aside. But second of all, Valen sees his friends die every year. Boys that he has come to care about die in these tests. And in the end, there are only a couple of them left. And of course, they are a very tight friend group. Now, this is the first book in a trilogy. And I do think that this one can be read as a standalone perfectly, but I think that the trilogy as a whole is definitely worth your attention as well. And something that is also quite emotional, if you do continue after this first book, is that, like Fitz in a way, when Valen grows up, you see how his childhood trauma has an effect on him later on, which I think is just incredibly sad in a way. The other grimdark fantasy series that I want to talk about is very emotional for different reasons, and that is The Emperor's Blades by Brian Staveley. This is the first book in the Chronicle of the Unhung Throne trilogy, which is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. I know that not a lot of people like this series, but I honestly don't know why. The story is superb. It's one of the best tales that I've read in a very long time, possibly ever, and the writing style is beautiful. In this book, we meet the 3 children of the Emperor, and the story starts when the Emperor dies. We have the heir to the throne, who is training to become a priest, but he doesn't really know why. We have the second son, who is training to become a warrior. And then we have the daughter, who was living with the emperor at the time that he died, and she is training to become a politician. Now, this is very emotional because you see what happens when the emperor dies, when his children are actually not really ready. They are in different parts of this very vast empire, they cannot talk to each other, and there is a lot of mistrust. And you actually see how all of them become the worst version of themselves. So this is like a steady decline, and you come to care for these characters because, again, when you meet them, they are full of hope and they want to change the world, and then everything basically goes to hell. So this is emotional for different reasons. I know that a lot of people would absolutely hate this book because of what it does to its characters, but I absolutely adored it. So know what you're getting into here. But if you do, and if this is something that you do like, if you like, for example, what happens to some of the characters in The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, this is going to be one that you absolutely adore as well, in my opinion. Now, of course, when I am talking about emotional fantasy reads, I had to mention Robin Hobb, but also one of my other favorite fantasy authors of all time, and that is Juliette Merlier. Now, if you want to have an emotional read by her, I would just say pick up any book that she has written, but especially these 2. Both of these are coming-of-age stories, of course, and that just adds an emotional layer to it, I suppose. In Wolfskin, which is the first one in an historical fantasy that's inspired by the Vikings, we meet Eyvind when he's a young boy. Now, he wants to grow up to become a warrior of Thor. Eyvind has a very low self-esteem where he thinks that he's not smart, and because of that, he is easily influenced by other people. Now, when he's a young man and his friend Ulf says that he wants to make a settlement in one of the nearby isles, he agrees to come with him. And in the beginning, everything is okay. They live in a friendly harmony with the native people. But then things change, and Eyvind needs to decide where his loyalties lie. This is a heartbreaking story, also a beautiful tale, and of course, knowing Robin Hobb, there is a little bit of romance to it. With Daughter of the Forest, which is my favorite book of all time, I just need to say that this is incredibly heartbreaking. In this one we meet Sorka, and this is a retelling of the Six Swans. Now, I'm not even going to say more about this, I've talked about this book 100 times, but just know that Sorka is one of my favorite characters of all time, and the things that happen to her and her loved ones are absolutely heartbreaking. Luckily, this is a fairy tale, so there is some hope in the end, of course, but yes, beautifully written, a beautiful tale. You're going to love Sorka and you're going to cry alongside with her when horrible things happen. If you want to know more about this, I do have an entire spoiler-free review that I will leave in the description box down below. Now, after all of these fantasy series, I have another true standalone for you on the list. And that is The Binding by Bridget Collins. Now, I do think that this book is quite popular outside of fantasy circles, but inside of the fantasy community, I actually don't hear a lot of people talking about this, even though it is a fantasy and it is superb. In this book, we meet Emmett. Emmett is a farmer's boy and he lives in a strange world because everything is more or less the same as in our world, but books and the binding of books is completely different. In this world, when you are a bookbinder, you bind a person's memory into a book. And afterward, this person doesn't know anything about it. They don't know about the memory, of course, because it has been removed, but they don't even know going to a bookbinder. Now, Emmett grows up as a farmer's boy, but then something happens and he needs to leave the safety of his home and go live with an old woman who is a bookbinder and learn the craft from her. And then someday he finds a book with his name on it. Now, this is a strange book because from the start you have this eerie feeling that something is going to happen, that you're going to find out why Emmett needs to leave his hometown, why he needs to become a binder, what's inside of Emmett's book, and you know that it's not going to be good. You feel attached to Emmett, and in the first part you're leading up to something, and then in the second part you have a flashback of everything that happens before, and everything that you've read in the first part becomes clear. I think that this is a magnificent book, but you are going to feel very attached to Emmett, and you are going to feel as clueless as him, and it's going to make you feel a little bit annoyed that you just don't know what's happening, but also afraid, because you do know that when you know the secret, it might change everything in Emmett's world. Beautiful book that I highly recommend. Next up, I have another coming-of-age story for you, of course, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is the first book in the Winter Night trilogy, which is just beautifully written by Arden. I must say, if, again, that is something that you find important, definitely pick up this book. This reads like a fairy tale, but it's actually a folklore retelling, and in this one we meet Vasha, who lives in the secluded Moscow woods. Now, she is one of the only people of her village who can see the household spirits. And in a time period where Christianity is starting to enter her town and where she gets a very devout stepmom, very devout to Christianity, that's not a good thing. On top of that, Vasha is very strong-willed, which of course we don't like to see in girls. So all in all, a lot of people are trying to stop her, are trying to decide what's good for her. And since we come to love Vasha, love her strong will, this is very annoying and it can be quite heartbreaking at times as well. One that I think if you love fairy tales, you will also enjoy. And of course, come winter, this is the perfect trilogy to pick up. Now, where fairy tale retellings often have a feel-good story to them, MidRetellings are a different story, and I could actually redirect you to my mid-retelling recommendations list, but for this video I have chosen the two that I think are the most heartbreaking. The first one is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which is a Greek mid-retelling, and the second one is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Kornicek. Now, The Witch's Heart is one of my favorite books of all time. In this one we meet Angerboda, who is one of the wives, at least, of Loki, and also the mother of his 3 children. Now, a Norse myth, especially, is going to have a little bit of grief. And especially seeing Angerboda, how much she loves Loki, but also the type of person that Loki is, it just makes for an additional story of sadness. Because I think when a marriage is not working, when you are the mother of somebody's children, and things do not work out, this is of course something that is going to pull on your heartstrings. And especially when you know that Angrboda, of course, in the original Norse myths was kind of vilified, and here she has a much more human nature to her, which makes you care for her a little bit more. With Ariadne, of course, this is the story of the sister of the Minotaur. This is a story of deceit. Ariadne is a young girl, she is easily influenced, and time again, she is deceived by the people she thinks love her. And of course, that in itself is heartbreaking. A Greek myth retelling, again, there is going to be grief, there is going to be sadness, because that's just what Greek myths are all about. And seeing more about Ariadne, and again, having more of the human nature to her, having a nuanced character instead of a one-dimensional one that we have in the original myths, just makes it all the more emotional. So yes, these two for sure, but if you want to see more, look at my myth retellings list, because almost all of them would fit the bill. So these are all of the emotional books that I wanted to talk about. Definitely let me know in the comments down below if you have some recommendations for me or the other people who are reading the comments, and also let me know what you think of my list. Are there some that you want to pick up in the foreseeable future? Now, like I said, I don't really have a feel-good fantasy list yet. Maybe I can make one of those in the future, but for now I do have a fairy tale recommendations list that you can see right here, and there I do talk about some feel-good fairy tale retellings or original fairy tales. As always, I do hope that you enjoyed this video, and see you next time. Bye!